Hi, I'm Michael Apple for BizNews.com. I'm joined by Shadow Minister for the Public Service and Administration, Dr. Leon Schreiber. Dr. Schreiber, thank you for joining us from afar. You're missing out on all the load shedding.
Hi, Michael, and hi to the viewers. Yes, I suppose I'm missing out on it, but I can tell you it is just as frustrating being abroad and seeing the way that this is making news headlines around the world. It's really terrible, terrible publicity for South Africa.
I want to speak about something else that's quite terrible, and that's not my opinion. That's the opinion of the Zondo Commission that sat for 4 years and came to a conclusion. What is that conclusion, Dr. Schreiber?
So the great news is that this is now no longer even just the DA's opinion, and this is around the matter of ANC cadre deployment. This is a situation or a practice that has been going on for well over 20 years now. And finally, we've had really complete vindication from the Zondo Commission confirming that cadre deployment is unconstitutional and illegal. Also, basically rubbishing President Ramaphosa and Minister Gwede Mantashe's claims during their testimony in front of the Commission that somehow this was a harmless practice and that the cadre deployment committee only makes recommendations. The Commission finds in very clear terms that the ANC's cadre deployment committee exists in order to interfere in appointment processes in the public administration. It also confirms that this committee actually issues instructions on who should be appointed to positions of power. The problem with this, of course, and as we've been arguing for 2 decades now, is that this practice circumvents the legally defined appointment processes. In other words, it's a secretive committee that meets and decides on the basis of considerations that are favorable to the ANC, who should be appointed, rather than having an open and merit-based appointment process. So we are delighted that the Zondo Commission has come to this conclusion because it adds very powerful additional ammunition to the court case that we've lodged in order to now have this confirmed by a court that this practice is unconstitutional and must be uprooted. I would just say that the urgency of this court case has been proven by Minister Mantashe, who within less than a week came out to try and undermine this finding and saying that, well, the Zondo Commission is just a commission, it's not a court of law. That is exactly why we've gone to court, and I'm sure that this is now going to be the final critical step in this process so we can really put the nail into the coffin of ANC cadre deployment.
So there's a two-pronged approach, as I understand it. You have gone to court to have cadre deployment ruled unlawful, unconstitutional. But you've also introduced a piece of legislation colloquially called the End Cadre Deployment Bill. It has a fancier name than that. Let's start with the bill. When was it introduced and where is it? What's happening with it?
So the bill was introduced in August of last year. We had an initial round calling for public comments just on the objectives of the bill. And in that case, we got hundreds of very powerful comments supporting the position outlined by the bill. On the 8th of June, I also presented it to the Portfolio Committee on Public Service. And it should be in the new term in August that there will be another meeting to actually now discuss and vote on whether this bill moves forward or not. So what has been really encouraging is that the proposals contained in the End Cadre Deployment Bill, which is designed to do just that, by, for example, making it illegal for anyone who holds political office, in other words, any politician in a party, to actually be employed in the public service and the public administration. It would also make it a criminal offense to interfere in appointment processes in the way that the Cadre Deployment Committee does, with a 1-year jail sentence attached to that. And it would give significantly expanded powers and also enhance the independence of the Public Service Commission to actually enforce merit-based appointments throughout the state. So the good news is that these proposals received quite strong support from the Public Service Commission itself and also from some officials in the Department of Public Service and Administration who have supported key aspects of the bill. The question, of course, now will be the ANC, will the turkeys vote for Christmas? They do at this stage still have a majority in Parliament, although we're working hard to make sure that ends in 2024. So at the moment, we are basically rallying as much support for the bill as we can, whether that's from civil society or from other opposition parties, so that we can really stand up and be counted when this bill is voted on in Parliament. Just an important point to make, now that the final Zondo report is out and essentially confirms the need for the bill, it's going to be very interesting to see whether this is going to be the first instance where the ANC starts to undermine the findings of the Zondo Commission. In my view, voting against the End Cadre Deployment Bill would directly contradict what the Commission has found. Now, we've repeatedly heard the ANC and President Ramaphosa saying how they will support the implementation of the recommendations from the Commission. We will know very soon whether that means anything, I think, when the End Cadre Deployment Bill appears in Parliament. Now, as you mentioned, obviously, on the other side, we do have the legal action going ahead. It's been a long road to get to this point, because what we had been lacking really for the last 20 years was the kind of hard evidence of how this committee operates that would really seal the deal in a court case. We had, of course, the ANC's stated policy on cadre deployment, but for many years there were these denials that this committee doesn't really exist, it doesn't do much, it doesn't really influence anything. And really the breakthrough in this case came when we exposed those minutes from the ANC's cadre deployment committee, because that is the hard evidence, along with the Zondo findings, along with testimony delivered in front of the Commission. Those are the things that will be decisive in the court case, and that's why we're very confident that finally we have enough to win this case.
Remind me, Dr. Schreiber, the period from which you were able to get those minutes and which minutes are still missing.
Indeed, and this is something that Judge Zondo also addresses in the final volume of the report. So what we have are the minutes from 2018 until 2021. This is also what the ANC shared with the Zondo Commission. But President Ramaphosa, during his testimony, told the Commission that somehow the minutes don't exist for the period during which he was the chairperson of this committee. That's from 2012 until 2018. And again, it's no longer just the DA or civil society saying that this is unlikely. The Zondo report itself says that it is either very unlikely or a shocking practice to make decisions around who is appointed and not even keep proper records of that. The reason I think it is nothing but a bald-faced lie is because in the very first meeting minutes from May 2018 that we do have, in other words, the ANC contends that there are no minutes before this date. The very first item from those minutes is the adoption of the previous minutes. And therefore, even by its own documents, according to their own documents, there is at least one set of earlier minutes that they have not made available to the Commission or to the public. And that is why, while we are running with this court case now against the practice itself, we have also currently going on and are hoping for a court date for a separate court action where we are still trying to force the ANC to make available those earlier minutes. And as I say, this example, which confirms that there are indeed at least some minutes from prior to this period, are going to be really critical because they will show the personal involvement of what this committee did while President Ramaphosa was the chairperson. So watch this space in this regard as well.
Well, technology is amazing. Perhaps they are able to find 6 years worth of minutes miraculously. I want to ask you about best case, worst case scenario here. Best case, Parliament reconvenes, the bill is adopted, and the majority of the people sitting in the ANC ranks are going to find it a tough day. And many of them who have positions within government, who themselves were deployed through this committee, are going to find themselves out in the cold and the dark with begging bowls. That is best case scenario. Worst case scenario, the ANC does what the ANC has always done, and that is close ranks, use their majority in Parliament, and then we wait until 2024 when they have a diminished majority in Parliament?
So just to say, first of all, on the best case scenario, as you put it, the key distinction to make is that this case and cadre deployment in general, the problem with it is not with respect to the political sphere. So members of parliament, the president, councillors, and even some political advisors that are provided for in the law, those are obviously political positions. And in fact,
they're politicians,
it is democratically correct that the ANC, if it gets a certain number of votes, will be entitled to a certain number of seats and filling those seats. So that's not what this is about. So technically, the ANC members of parliament will not be the ones who will suffer the consequences because they are politicians, and that is correctly so in any democracy. However, where there will be an impact is obviously for ANC members or cadres or supporters who have gotten positions in the civil service, which is supposed to be an independent and impartial implementer of government policy. And that's made very clear also by the Constitution that members of the public service must implement the lawful policies of the government of the day. So there's no question about that. What the ANC has, however, done is extended its political influence much deeper into the civil service. And that's why you see people who are supposed to be town planners or engineers or other technical positions are filled by people who can't do the job because they are appointed on the basis of their loyalty to the ANC, not on their ability to do the job. So that's an important distinction, and perhaps gives some hope that the ANC can understand this distinction. And given the Zondo reports, there may be some members who feel like this is the right thing to do. However, we are not naive about it. And obviously, until you have a majority or in Parliament, then you can't guarantee any of these things. So that is why we are following the additional steps that I've outlined, because even if the bill does not pass, we will have the court case, which hopefully will seal the deal against cadre deployment, and then the ANC will have no choice. Then there will be no choice for Mr. Mantashe to say, oh, well, it's just a commission. And we will take this thing all the way to the Constitutional Court if that's what it takes to get this confirmed. Now, of course, we already know that the Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court, in Judge Zondo, has made his views clear on this. And so that does really give hope that whenever this court case does conclude, we will emerge victorious from that. But there is another aspect here that I'm currently working on, and that is, while the court case and the bill are looking forward and saying, how do we prevent this from ever happening again in future? There's also an aspect here, or a potential for us to look backwards, at least into the immediate history based on those minutes. And that is something that we're currently exploring. What is the best way to intervene in specific appointments that were made in an unlawful and unconstitutional manner through the Cadre Deployment Committee? So that is another potential action step that we are currently exploring. And so in whatever configuration this ends, I am quite confident that it will be before the 2024 election. It will be either through the courts or through Parliament or through other legal action, or potentially all of those together. But I think that's perhaps the important point of this entire campaign, is when you want to take on something like systemic corruption, which is really what cadre deployment is, there's no single silver bullet or one statement or thing that you can issue and say, now you're winning this fight. It is a very long-term, and it requires a very comprehensive response. And I think that's more than anything reason for optimism in this case, is that the DA really has been working very comprehensively against this. And I think that's why we're ultimately going to succeed, because we are simply winning the war on all fronts, whether that's in the public mind, whether that is politically, whether that is going to be in the courts, whether that's through the Zondo Commission. Those are all the avenues of this conflict, and I'm very confident that we are now starting to see the fruits of this fight.
Would you be able to, and I suppose this is what you're looking at, retrospectively look at some of the people who were deployed and the shenanigans they got up to at state-owned entities like Eskom, like Transnet, like PRASA, and then hold them responsible?
That is exactly the direction in which I'd like to go. And an important part of this is that the Zondo report has also confirmed that cadre deployment amounts to unfair labor practice. So that opens an opportunity. And the reason obviously is simple, because if you and I apply for a job and we go through a selection process, but in the meantime, there's a secret meeting that's decided a different candidate should be appointed, regardless of the outcome of that selection process, that's obviously unfair labor discrimination against the people who were not favored by the Cadre Deployment Committee. So there's a labor law aspect that we're looking into. And then, of course, at the moment, any retrospective action would only be limited to the 3 years of hard evidence that we have in the form of those minutes. And that's where it links again with the case we've got going on to get hold of earlier minutes, because then we can also go back further and look, and it's highly relevant to look at the period when the current president of the republic was the one interfering in these appointments. And that is an incredibly important piece of this puzzle that has to be part of any accountability for past decisions that have already been taken. So at the moment, I mean, we are looking at different options. You'll appreciate it's quite a complex and a difficult terrain to navigate, because you obviously will have to find people who were themselves disadvantaged, who went through this process. Alternatively, you're going to have to deal with arguments from the ANC saying, but no, it was only recommendations, that whole kind of argument. So we want to make sure that we've got a solid argument before we pursue that. But the bottom line is, I think for justice to really happen in this case and for state capture to really come to an end, we have to find a way to hold those people accountable for which we have evidence where they interfered with appointments, and also make sure that looking forward, it's outlawed and that this is not going to happen again, that it's no longer possible going forward through the kind of reforms in the End Cadre Deployment Bill to really radically change the way that people are appointed in the public administration in South Africa.
For those who say the DA is simply anti-transformation and anti-ANC and doesn't want to see progress in the country, is the state of South Africa currently, and when I say the state, I'm talking about the roads are falling apart, we can't keep the lights on, we're not employing people, we can't get coal to our ports aren't working, our rail networks have been destroyed. Do you attribute that directly to cadre deployment?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And therefore, the biggest victims of cadre deployment, as is always the case with any form of corruption, are the poorest of the poor who rely to some extent on those functioning public services, because they are the ones at the end of the day who have no buffer against the kind of rising food prices that we see, the kind of economic implosion and growing unemployment that we all see all around us. And even things like the stage 6 load shedding that's taking place right now. That is the direct consequence, the direct result of cadre deployment over many, many years, over decades, into different positions, different levels within an institution like Eskom. And now it is something that's reached really a crisis point, and it's really affecting the poorest of the poor the most. So the fallacy here is that somehow cadre deployment in any form is beneficial to the poor. That is absolutely untrue. And in fact, the thing that will be of greatest service to the 30 million South Africans who live in poverty is to make sure that we finally start appointing competent people into positions like state-owned enterprises, like government departments, because at the end of the day, we need people to start doing these jobs. We cannot fix the roads or the ports or the harbors or electricity until we get competent people into positions of power. And whether that person is black or white or whatever the case may be, should really be immaterial at this point. Our state is collapsing, and we need the best from all among society to really step forward into public service. And I would also just say it's really insulting to the millions of unemployed black professionals in South Africa, many young graduates who cannot find work despite being far more qualified than many of these cadres who have been deployed to positions in the state, to somehow say that they require cadre deployment and some kind of ANC patronage system in order to find jobs. That is a mafia-like argument to make. And at the end of the day, it is exactly those skills that we are not drawing on. We are not attracting that new generation of young, talented, and many of them black South Africans who can help us fix these problems, because cadre deployment actually locks them out far more than it does anyone else, because it reserves these positions for people like Dudu Myeni and Claudio Motsoneng and Brian Molefe. And frankly, making the argument that those people are more qualified because they have links to the ANC than the millions of unemployed young people especially is really a very insulting argument to make.
Dr. Leon Schreiber, thank you for your time.